That is Dade, and this is Satan and Coffee. Hope you guys enjoyed the music this morning. I wanted something with a little bit more energy to it. And for me, like, I really dig Ghost Main and like the kind of like the topics in the lyrics. It's very occult based. I mean, this last track is, you know, from an album called For the Aspiring Occultist. So there's that. For those that were thinking that I might use the track I just released and the intro, unfortunately, that's just one track, which is less than 3 minutes long. So, and finding more music that kind of fits like that doesn't, like, there really isn't anything else that really fits like that. So once more tracks are made, then I think we might like start using those for like intro music. I might use that for example, like pre-recorded video intro, like introduction, like snip out like 15-30 seconds of it and slap that into a video. But speaking of, for those that don't know, we released a track of some self-made music. And it is live. It's been live since yesterday. Rather proud of it, especially the context, the lyrics, the sound, all that stuff. Definitely, something that we're proud of having out in the open. So for this morning, what we're going to be talking about. So we've covered a lot of things. I've been thinking this morning. Been sitting. I've been thinking. Been like, all right. So we've talked about, like, if we go down it. Right, track was great. Thank you, Maeve. Yeah. Well, the people that have been leaving feedback are leaving rather positive feedback. So that's always good. That's always good to see. I mean, I'm not expecting, shit to blow up after just dropping one track and everyone go, oh my God. Especially because, I mean, it's very niche music, right? Like, I mean, it's not exactly talking about a topic that many people can, personally relate to, which is kind of the point when you're releasing music, right? You want people to connect to it. So, and that's the thing. We want our people to connect to it, but everything else is kind of out there, right? So what we've talked about in the past, right? So kind of going through, it's like, okay, what have we spoken about, so far with Satan and Coffee? Because I remember when I started this, we started reading, like we just did, Sundays, and we read from the Satanic Bible and we talked about interpretations, and it's very much like, a mass. It was very much like a black mass. And I think obviously, like, there's a natural evolution point, right, from that, right? And it kind of goes out. So over the last little while, we've talked about, individual freedom, right? So like we talked about forging your own path, adversarial living. We've dug into like politics versus spirituality. We've dug into philosophy and psychology, like looking at Nietzsche and Jung. We've talked about essentially the societal rot, going over the trauma model, morality versus ethics, political violence, cancel culture. We've talked about all of that stuff, and then, even with Apocrypha, we kind of talked about fear and freedom. And so I've been sitting here and I've been thinking, okay, so what is the natural, like, next step? Like, what's the next thing that makes sense going beyond all of those points that we've talked about? And for me, it's beyond the opposition. So the word adversary itself, like, means to go against, right? We understand that. We know this, right? One second. I got coffee and Monster. So just want something cold. So the word itself, adversary, um, is to go against, is to be against something, to be oppositional, right? Being adversarial. But does that mean that like we're adversarial just to be adversarial, that we just go against shit just to go against shit because, you know, the left-hand path is the adversarial path and, you know, we just need to be against fucking everything, right? Well, no, it doesn't. It doesn't mean that. Pumpkin spice this morning, guys. Switched out the hazelnut for pumpkin spice. 'Tis the season for pumpkin spice. So the problem with rebellion is it still ties you to a master, right? So like when you're rebellious against something, how does first of all, how does rebellion or being adversarial tie you to a master? I mean, it's pretty simple. It ties you to the thing that you are rebelling against. Like when you solely focus on being rebellious for rebellion's sake, or, you know, your only focus is the thing that you are adversarial against, you stand against, whether that be a political system, whether that be a deity, you know, a religious structure, whatever it is, right? You are tying yourself directly to that thing, regardless of how much you hate and dislike it and want to separate yourself from it. Like we understand, like I think we've talked about this before when we look at love and hate. Love and hate are not opposites. They require roughly about the same amount of energy, like you putting that energy into somebody, right? Like I think, you know, the biggest difference between love and hate is, you know, a fine line difference of, you know, the type of energy that you're putting into somebody, but you're still putting the equal amount of energy into someone or something when you love it or you hate it. Apathy is the opposite of love and hate. Like when you don't care anymore, you disconnect, like you just don't care about that thing anymore, right? There is no energy going into it, right? So when you rebel and you're adversarial and you have a target in, you know, that adversarial mindset, that becomes kind of like your master. The thing that you're rebelling against is your master. It's the thing that you're allowing to control your decision making. And I think that that's something that we kind of run into in society, you know, quite often is, you know, we hate something so much that it becomes the center of, you know, everything we do. Like, I mean, most influencer business models are built around the idea of loving something so much or hating something so much that you build your entire business and brand around that love or hate of whatever thing you're talking about. And it's very one-sided, and it still ties you to a master instead that isn't yourself, right? Because your decision making is now influenced by this thing that, you know, you hate so much and you stand against, right? So true adversaries don't just resist, they evolve past the game itself. I think it's important with the things that we say we stand against and with the things that we say that we, you know, we love and things like that. Like, I think especially with the things that we hate, I think there is a necessity to grow to apathy, to move to being kind of like apathetic and moving beyond it, understanding that this thing no longer affects you, right? It's kind of like, I think the best and easiest example is, you know, looking at my political views. You know, yes, I do, you know, consider myself like, you know, conservative leaning, with at least like my family values and, you know, things like that, things I've talked about in the past. I'm not going to get into them again. But I don't identify with any political party. Like, I just don't care. Like, I just don't see any advantage in either, in like aligning myself with either party there, right? Like Republican, Democrat, at least when we're talking about like the, you know, the dual party American system. I mean, you've got independents and stuff like that, but, you know, I mean, being an independent Like what? It's just they never win and they never will. Um, so when we look at that, like I think I've grown apathetic. I've just grown apathetic to the system, that it's broken. It's broken on both sides. There are very few small micro points on either side that I can agree with, and the majority of it's just kind of like, nah, like I'm just not there. And I think that's a natural progression. That's the point that we're talking about this morning, is that natural progression, that point of saying, okay, I am against this, then I'm against this, and now I just don't care. And I think the political party system thing is like the easiest example, because you start left, then there's things that you don't like, then you go right, and then there's things that you don't like, and then you're just kind of like, I don't care anymore. Like, none of this encompasses anything that actually helps me identify myself as anything. So I just 86th out, right? So the prison of opposition. We're going to open this point with Nietzsche, right? So when you fight monsters, take care not to become one, right? Constant opposition locks you into the shadow of what you resist. So this is a very important point, right? Because I think that what we're seeing in society today is we're seeing a lot of this. We're seeing a lot of this happening, okay? Is that people grab onto one idea, refuse to grow from it. They need to perpetuate it. This is another problem, right? And so when you initially start to resist against something, when you initially start to stand up and say, okay, I am against this thing, this idea, this concept, you need to constantly renew the level of hatred and energy that you're putting into the thing that you hate. You have to. Right? Because life is constantly evolving. Nothing stays the same. So, like, you either have to find something new or you have to go deeper. And usually, even if you do find something new, you still have to go deeper, because that thing's going to be related to the first thing that you were standing against, you were rebelling against, you were adversarial towards. And so, quoting Batman, which obviously is very Nietzschean, like at least from the Dark Knight, is you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And that's what Nietzsche is laying down here, right? So when you fight monsters, take care not to become one. And we're seeing a lot of that happening. A lot of people are so dead set in what it is that they're doing or how they're doing it, that they are slowly and unconsciously becoming the very thing that they hate. And I mean, if people don't see that, then you really need to take a step back and look in the mirror, because it's happening, and then it's happening all over the place, right? Which is the problem when you dedicate your life to standing against something. You always become what you hate. I taught it for years. You do if you don't reach the point of being apathetic to it, right? But you didn't believe me. Most people wouldn't. Most people don't look at it. Like most people, right? Like most people don't look at, that the necessity of the natural progression through adversarial living of, like being like, left-hand path, that it's not all about being adversarial. It's not always about hating something and standing against something. It is being self-aware enough to know that the core value of the left-hand path is your own, self-deification, the understanding of, the God self, being able, individuation, like understanding your own power and control in your own life. So when the focus isn't self-improvement and it's, I hate this thing, you will inevitably become that very thing that you hate, just on the other side of it, sometimes the same side. You know, again, like it's kind of funny, like, you know, looking at some of, like, you know, some of the stuff that I've seen on like TikTok and stuff like that. Like, I've seen some really, you know, disgusting shit, like like on both sides. Like, I have seen people go so far left that they're right, and then I've seen, like, I don't know what you would call it, but like, I've seen people like go so far to the right that it's just like, I don't even know what I'm looking at. Like, I like, some of these things like look like infomercials for like fucking Nazi Germany. Uh, like, you know, it's like, wait, what? Um, I don't see a lot of it, but like, I do see it. I do see it. It's just like, what the fuck, man? It's like, how far over, like, do you have to go? Like, I mean, before you go full circle, right? And the thing with the left-hand path is it's not about hating anything. It's about being adversarial and standing your own ground, but standing your own ground in such a way that you are defending, you know, yourself. You take care of yourself. The focus is self, the self, like the God self, the individuation, becoming, you know, the higher version of yourself, and not sacrificing your ideals, your morals, you know, for anything else. And if something comes in and tries to change that, that's what you're adversarial against. That's what you stand against. That's what you stand for. You stand for yourself. Right? And I think people just don't realize that when you perpetuate hate, you become that. You become that thing that you hate. So, you know, yeah, so constant opposition, it locks you into the shadow. Like, you don't integrate it. You know, you live in it. So, you know, example for this could be like political radicals on both sides, right? They define themselves entirely by their enemy, and then they are trapped in reaction, right? You become trapped in the reaction, right? So your enemy does something and you react to it, and that is who you are. You are a living reaction to the things around you, right? And that doesn't even have to be, you know, politically. Like, even religious radicals do the same thing, right? Like religious extremists, it's the same thing. It's reactionary behavior, right? So they identify an enemy, they focus on the enemy, and then when the enemy does something, they just react to it. And that is their entire existence, is a reactionary existence. Yes, reaction means you're insane. Yeah, pretty much. You craft yourself as not being the other. Exactly, right? Like, you don't have a definition of yourself. You just say, I'm not this, but then can't define who you are. And when you're unable to define who you are, you know, I think that's like, it's murky water to be in. It is truly murky water when your only focus is what you're against and not who you are as a person, not being able to define yourself, but only being able to define your enemy. And by defining your enemy, you find, or try to find, who you are and what you're not. And that's not a healthy way to live, right? We don't want to do that. We don't want to live our lives like that. We don't want to constantly define who we are by what we're not, or simply by being the opposite of, right? We want to have a solid ground to stand on. And I think, like, for me, that's where I'm at, right? I know who I am. I know who I am. I am spiritually. I know who I am, you know, in the mundane. And I'm kind of getting tired of kind of saying politically, because it's like, it's not even politically like how I define myself. I just have values that I believe in, and I'm not going to compromise my values or my principles. Like that's it. That's all there is to it. It's not that I'm against inherently or necessarily against any one thing or any group of anything. I just am. I just am who I am, and I know who I am, and I'm happy with who I am. And it's not that I'm in. Like I said, it's not like I'm focused on like I'm against this, I'm against that, I'm against this. I'm just me, and I'm happy being me, and I'm going to defend me. And if something comes in, that wants to destroy that, then, I'll act accordingly. But, it's not a matter of living like I'm against, like I'm this edgelord, whatever, and I'm against everything. No, I'm just me. I mean, I don't really can't think of any other way to fucking put it. Right. So the question here is, when it comes to the prison of opposition, it's like, are you truly free if your identity still requires your enemy to exist? And this is actually a good question to ask about, like, for example, even the United States. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love my country. I really do. I love the United States. I love the freedoms that it affords people, and, the ability to speak openly and have discourse like this, and, have these types of conversations. But when you sit there and you think about it, like the only times that the United States has really been united, right? Or maybe any country for that matter, not just the United States, but I can speak for the United States because I'm American, and I've lived through it. Like I've seen some shit, But the only time that the United States has truly been, united in a bipartisan way is when we've had an enemy focal point, right? When we've had a national enemy that threatened the American way of life is when the United States has been the most united. World War II, Pearl Harbor, 9/11, right? If you think about it, like those are the times that the country has been the most united under like the same ideal, the same focal point, right? The same goal. So looking at that, I'll reiterate the question: are you truly free if your identity still requires your enemy to exist? Are you truly focusing on the God self, on self-deification, on individuation, if your identity, who you identify as being, requires your enemy to exist? I wouldn't say so. I have no enemies. There you go. There you go. Like, I mean, I believe that like you're not free if you feel like you need, like if somebody sits, I'm saying you as a general statement here, everyone. If you sit down and you think about the things that you stand against, and then if you think about those things not being there, and then you don't know who you are or who you would be, right? Opposition is opportunity. It can be if treated correctly. Would you say that the practice naturally leads to a more centrist outlook? Unsought seeker, that's a good question. That is a very good question. I feel like if the path is followed correctly, and if we're talking about the left-hand path, I do feel like there is a natural kind of centrist, inevitability that happens with the left-hand path if treated correctly, right? And I think that just takes time to get to that. Because I think when most people get into the left-hand path, especially if we're talking like the younger generation, like we're talking about, teenagers and young adults, like so between the ages of like 15 and 25. I think what happens with that age bracket is it's natural to see atrocity, right? Because everything in the world is new. Everything in the world is It's just bombarding you every day, right? And between, you know, brain development and hormones and hormonal changes and just between physical and psychological growth, you know, it's natural to have things that you want to change in the world, right? It's natural to have that, you know, emotional part of things that you attach to everything, of wanting everyone to be able to just exist. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think between in that age bracket, again, the 15 to 25, like, I mean, there's just a lot of, you know, uncontrolled emotion. There's a lot of, you know, reaction to things happening around you. So I think naturally over time, as you grow and mature and develop as a human being, you begin to learn what's important to you. And this is kind of like the big step, right? Like, you need to learn individually, like on an individual level, what is important to you. Not what is important to other people, because the idea here is what happens a lot of the time is we start focusing externally to ourselves and what's important to the rest of the world, instead of what is, you know, individually important to us, our success, our growth, you know, our self-deification, reaching our Godhead, you know, our God self, you know, within the shadow, being able to integrate our own shadow, focusing on our own traumas and our own problems. And so I do think that if that natural progression happens, then I do think that, yes, the left-hand path does lend itself more to a centrist kind of outlook on things than it does on one side or the other, right? Despite it being called the left-hand path, because it is a focus of self, right? And so, and then this is kind of like the biggest problem, because the thing is like, yes, you can want to, you know, defend, you know, other people's that are external to yourself, but not at the cost of sacrificing the self. And I think what happens a lot of the time, especially with people that, again, are in that age bracket, usually that age bracket, 15 to 25, there's exceptions to everything, but usually that's the age bracket with the, you know, when you get started within the left-hand path, that the focal point isn't the self. The focal point is everything that's external to you. And that's another thing about, you know, understanding, you know, going beyond opposition, is because when you exist only to oppose, you are inevitably not focusing on self. You're focusing on everyone and everything else that has nothing to do with you. You need to understand your own cable toe, how much you can extend yourself to help another. Exactly. Like, you need to understand your own limitations. And so I think the natural progression is understanding what the individual, what the self needs, and what needs to be integrated. And so once you reach that point of understanding the work that you need to do on yourself, again, to reach the Godhead, to reach, you know, the God self, you know, then you are, you know, at the point of being more centric in nature through the left-hand path than anything else. Because if something begins to affect you in a negative way, we understand that it's not needed to dive headfirst into this thing and attack it, but rather cut it out, right? We talk about this a lot in past episodes, like toxic relationships, things like that, right? Like, you can be against somebody coming into your life being toxic and fucking your shit up, right? But you're not going to define your identity, you know, based on a bad relationship. At least you shouldn't, right? You really shouldn't. Be you without being left-hand path. If I wasn't left-hand path, I would still be me. Who I am today, right, independently of being left-hand path, I would still be me, albeit through the things that I've learned while being on the left-hand path, right? But I don't need the left-hand path to be me. I don't need the symbolism. I don't need, the tropes that come along with it to be who I am. Right? So who I am, speaking about my values and things like that, saying I'm left-hand path. Yes, I am left-hand path, but it is more of a way to explain like how my brain works rather than being that thing and that is all I am, right? And it's philosophically speaking, like the most philosophical question you can ask, one person can ask themselves is, who am I? Right? Like when you ask that question, who am I? Who am I? Right? And like most people will tell you their name. And be like, well, I mean, that's your name, but that's not who you are, right? That's your government identification. It's like, and then the natural progression of that conversation would go, well, I don't know, like I'm a doctor, right? Like, or I'm a DJ or whatever. It's like, well, that's not who you are. That's just something you do. And then, they kind of go down the line of like all these different things that they're into, like, oh, I'm a metalhead or I'm a hip hop head or I'm this. Well, that's, again, that's something you're into. That's something you're interested in, but that's not who you are. And so the best way that I know how to answer that question, if somebody were to ask me that question, Adius, who are you? Is I am. I am who I am. There are too many aspects to who I am as a person to be defined by just one thing. And I believe that all people need to get to the point of understanding that you are too complex to identify yourself as just one thing. You are many things, all at the same time, simultaneously, and depending on situation and circumstance. Right? I am not, nor will I ever be identified as one thing or another. And I think what happens is when we fall into this trap of trying to identify ourselves and other people as just one thing, then what we fall into is dehumanization. Because when you identify something as being just one thing, or overarchingly saying that it is just one thing, what we fall into is we fall into dehumanization. We dehumanize other people by identifying them as this, that, or the next, without understanding that someone can be many different things all at the same time, and that there is no just one single way to identify yourself or any other person. So again, like the best way I found to answer that philosophical question is I am. That's it. That's it. That's that's the only way I know how to logically answer that question. And even that doesn't fully do it justice, but I think it's the best way to do it. So, fucking pink dinosaur. That is the mascot of the channel, everybody. That little emote right there. I need to find one that's big and just like slap it on the screen somewhere. So moving forward, right? So we just talk about the prison of opposition, right? So let's talk about Lucifer a little bit here, right? No, I don't want to close my camera app. That's for Adversary. That's not for Satan and Coffee, right? Mr. Mongoose is the mascot for Adversary, and Mr. Mongoose is in England, in a giant metal box. So Lucifer, beyond the binary, Okay, is how we're breaking this one down. So Lucifer is not just the enemy of God. That's the Christian framing. Like that, this is the first thing. Like we need to set the stage here, right? So Lucifer, usually across the board, is initially described as the enemy of God, even though he was like a pseudo Roman god before becoming the devil. But that's beside the point. In the left-hand path, we focus on the idea of him being the light bringer, the liberator, the transcender of false dualities, right? Again, and this is more aligned with, what would be the Roman kind of background of like what Lucifer was as a god. Okay. And if we look at from that, I think that another story that kind of falls into this, like that's parallel with the Lucifer story, is Prometheus, right? His gift of fire wasn't just rebellion against Zeus, it was empowerment of humanity, right? So Lucifer isn't just rebellion for rebellion's sake, nor is the left-hand path, but it's liberation. It's liberation from the things that we're at, like of being just an adversary, of just being an enemy. We're not in existence to be an enemy for just being an enemy because it's what we need to do, because it's not, right? Working with Lucifer isn't about blasphemy for shock. It's about embodying illumination that frees you from needing a system to rebel against. And I feel like the entirety of the left-hand path, once you actually understand the core values of the left-hand path, and you integrate that, and this goes to what Curtis said earlier, right? Is being you without being left-hand path. And that falls directly into Jungian psychology, Jungian individuation, in the integration of the shadow, is that there's something, when you identify as something, you are putting up a wall in front of you, right? And you're saying that this thing in front of me is me. And at the end of the day, that thing is, it's just a mask, right? It's just a mask. So what happens is you either continue to wear the mask or you integrate it, and you integrate it into the self. And so left-hand path or metalhead or, Luciferian or Satanist or whatever it is, whatever the term is that you're using, it's a descriptor, but it's a very brief descriptor of a single aspect of who you are, but not who you are entirely. So again, like to answer, again, to reiterate my answer to Curtis on that is like, with or without the left-hand path, I am me. Now, is the left-hand path a big part of like why I think the way that I think? Yes, but that's integrated. That's fully been integrated. So with or without left-hand path, I don't need to identify as left-hand path to be who I am. I am, and that's it. And the point of all of this, right? The point of all of everything that we talk about, everything that we've gone over, the point of all of it is to be able to integrate the shadow, to integrate these aspects of ourselves and build who we are as people and understand that we are not just one thing or another. Trinity, good morning. It's good to see you. Thank you for being here. And so, and I agree with what Curtis just said right there. Left-hand path is embodying what you want. It is, yes, it embodies a direction that I want to move into, but does that mean that I am like entirely and just only left-hand path? No, I'm not. Like with or without the left-hand path, there's so much more. The term LHP limits itself, and so it is just as pathetic as the RHP, the right-hand path. I think I do believe that there's a level of truth to that. I proudly do use the term left-hand path, as it does kind of like help me explain why I think the way that I think. And I think that if like you look at it, it's not to say that being left-hand path means that you're not right-hand path. This is another thing, right? So like we say left-hand path, like the right-hand path is a bad thing, or the right-hand path says right-hand path, like left-hand path is a bad thing. At the end of the day, you've got a left hand and a right hand, and you use both of them. Maybe not the same amount, but you still use both of your hands, right? Like you're not gonna, you know, cut one off and still have the same functionality, right? The level of function. I think you kind of need both, right? Like, and I think this is something that I've not spoken about in the past. But despite the fact that I constantly talk about, you know, the left-hand path, I don't know if you guys have noticed, I don't inherently go in and talk shit about the right-hand path. Right? First and foremost, the right-hand path doesn't really have like a full-on kind of definition. Using them like individually as like definitional, to, like to be contrary to each other is really difficult. It doesn't work. It doesn't really work that way, right? And maybe this is something I probably should talk about more. But you know, saying one is left-hand path isn't to say that you don't have aspects of the right-hand path. Trust me, you do, even if you don't pay attention to it. And I think that that's part of the reason, you know, why, you know, we don't use left-hand path and right-hand path like definitionally to describe shit, because it doesn't work that way, right? And I've said like all the time that like the left-hand path is a philosophical overlay that just kind of goes on top of shit. Right? It's a philosophy on how to live your life, but it's not inherently a spiritual path. And it's the same that kind of goes for the right-hand path. So there really isn't like an anti that exists here, right? Like it's not like being left-hand path is anti-right-hand path. It's just understanding that, you know, there's a lot that's kind of ignored about the self and the necessity of self and the necessity of personal growth. And the left-hand path focuses on that. And there are other aspects of that like philosophical overlay that are right-hand path. And just like what Curtis just said, the dragon needs both wings to soar. You know, and I don't disagree with that statement, right? It's you do need both, and we do exist in a point that has both, right? Though I don't talk about the right-hand path, I have no illusions of knowing that like there are many aspects of my life that integrate into that part as well, right? So yeah, your path, you're on a path, you walk it. Places on it. It's a vehicle. You're not the same as the vehicle. Exactly. Trinity. That's a very good way of putting it. Exactly. Yes. You know, you're on a path. The path goes places. You know, and that's the vehicle. But you're not the vehicle. You're not the thing that's moving. Right. I mean, you're not the thing that's. You know. Yeah, it's very well put. The terminology. So mostly working through a system or philosophy in order to better understand and express oneself without fully identifying with these tools. Yeah, it's not identifying yourself as the tool though, right? That's the thing. It's a tool is a tool. You're not the tool, right? At least I hope you're not. But that's kind of like the big thing that we kind of fall into, right? Is like I think that's actually, I think Samael really kind of put like a good point there. Is a lot of the time we use these things like the left-hand path, the right-hand path, like all of these things are, you know, tools. But you are not the tool. Self-deification is becoming. Yeah, exactly. Becoming, right? Exactly. I use that term a lot. Right. In Infernal Compass, which is, you know, my life coaching, you know, I use that exactly that becoming. There is only becoming, right? On this path and on what we're doing. Right. And to clarify, when I say this path, at this point, I'm just talking about like life path, like the path of life, like going from point A to point B, and point B is just dropping dead. So, everything between point A and point B, is just becoming the highest version of yourself, like the most control that you have over your own life, right? And Maeve, holy shit, thank you for like the 13-month fucking commitment, man. Like, greatly appreciate that. So let me go through these other comments here real quick. The right-hand path follows conventional morality, social order, and communal values, often involving devotion and submission to divine or universal laws. Okay. Left-hand path emphasizes individuation, self-deification, and challenging societal norms and taboos through subjective experiences and pragmatic self-reliance. Yeah. And the thing is like we exist on both planes. Like if you think about it, like communal values, the tribal mentality that exists in the world, like when you say communal values, people immediately think of like, like society at large or the government or like what has been, socially acceptable over, however long. But communal values, right? Social order, we all fall into that, right? Being in the occult community, right? There are communal values within the occult community. There is social order in the occult community, right? There is what's considered conventional morality that exists inside of the occult community, right? All of those things, if we're going by the definition, the online definition of what right-hand path is, all of those things, we are all subject to those things, whether we realize it or not. And at that point, right, you can't sit there and just start going against that just for the sake of going against it. There's nothing wrong with, being a part of that community, having those values and, all of the, that social order and that morality that falls inside of that. The path of unfolding is different from the path of return. See one. I can see one on the LHP still living conventional morality, social order, and communal values, but RHP may be the typical societal enforced. Possibly, but it doesn't mean that you're fully against it, though. Because at the end of the day, if you want to generalize that, right, there are laws. We all follow laws, right? We follow those laws because societally speaking, you go to jail, right? Encourage like fuck the path. It's like, yeah. So moving forward, okay. I want to get into a little bit Jung here, Jung and individuation. Okay. So the self is formed not by conforming to collective norms, nor by endlessly opposing them, but by integrating shadow and creating wholeness. Right? Let me repeat this. The self is formed not by conforming to collective norms, nor by endlessly opposing them. You don't become yourself by falling in line or never falling in line. It is about integrating the shadow and creating wholeness. It's about creating a whole version of yourself through both aspects, right? Through conformity and opposition. Right? So an example, a goth kid who grows up defining themselves only by being not mainstream risks becoming hollow once the mainstream moves on. True individuation means you'd still be you even if nobody is watching. And again, this is kind of like from my own personal self experience, right? Do I self-identify as goth? Yeah. Am I the same type of goth that I was at 16? No. Do I give a shit if goth is, like popular or public or, in the mainstream? I really don't give a shit. I describe goth by being the aesthetic, the music, the art, the literature, all of these things. That's how I define goth. Do I define myself as goth because I enjoy things that are considered gothic? Yes. Does that mean that that's the whole of who I am? No. Right? Some people would look at me like, some people think, I'm, a skater. Some people think I'm an artist. Sometimes people think, I'm a tattoo artist. I wish I was, but no, I'm not. Do not let me put a needle near your skin. I will fuck you up. Goth is literate. Mm-hmm. So, it's one of those things that, and then inside of goth, then there's all those fucking subcultures of goth that people identify with. Cyber goth, Victorian goth. I don't identify with any of those. I'm just goth. That's just, I just enjoy it. Right. Again, is it the full definition of who I am? No, it's not the full definition of who I am, but is it a part of me? Yeah, it is. Right. With or without the term. That's, it's a part of who I am. So that's where that kind of example comes from, is because that comes from my own personal experiences. The thing is that when I started with the goth thing, the whole intention was to be edgy, right? Back at 14, 15, when I started this shit, it's let's be edgy and fucking piss off my parents, and fucking put eyeliner on and paint my nails black with a Sharpie marker because I couldn't go out and buy fucking black nail polish, right? And stealing my mom's fucking makeup and shit. It worked. The same reason I shaved my head for the first fucking time when I was a kid, the same reason I grew my hair out long, the first time I did it. And, at that point, I never felt uncomfortable with it, and it just integrated. It stopped being about what other people thought of it or the reactions that I got from other people, and started being just, I enjoy this. I like this, I'm not going to let this go, and I'm pushing 40 years old and I'm still wearing, Jankos and platform boots and shoes and baggy shirts and, all of it. I'm still painting my nails and shit, and I'm probably gonna be 75 and doing the same thing. And I don't apologize for it. It's just, it integrated. It became part of me, right? And that's the thing, right? A phase is something that you go through, you do, and you don't integrate and you move past it because you realize that it doesn't work for you. And this is the individuation. This is the coming to self-deification, the Godhead, is that when you go through these experiences in your life, some things you will integrate, other things you will move past, right? Things are experiences, you experience them, and then you move forward, you move beyond it. And then there's other things that you do and you maintain it. You keep it. You integrate it. It becomes a part of your personality. It becomes a part of who you are. And only you know what those things are. And the only reason to do that is because it aligns with you, that it's, it becomes that part of you. It's not because of what other people think or, anything. Continue on with this, with the Jungian aspect of it, right? So if we're to apply this in application, right? Jung and the individuation process, right? Again, going with left-hand path, the left-hand path practice is individuation in action, right? So choosing what you value beyond what the tribe, the church, or the state tells you, right? And that's one of the reasons why we continually talk about left-hand path. It is an identifier to explain a certain mentality or idea, right? And within that philosophy, right, you can apply that philosophy, the LHP philosophy, to something like goth culture, being goth, right? It is being that thing because you like that thing, because that is something your core fundamental values align with, and you choose that value despite what other people tell you, despite what any group or person or individual says, right? You choose that direction because that is something that you're like, this is me. This is who I want to be. And so you are that thing. Now, the next part to talk about with this, right, is agency versus reaction. Okay? To be adversarial is not to be reactive. So, example, punk culture, right? Born from defiance, but eventually commodified and neutered because it remained stuck in fuck authority mode. Now, I'm sure there's people out there who are going to disagree with me, but let's just be completely fucking honest. Nobody gives a shit about the punk movement anymore, right? Politically speaking, it does nothing, right? It never evolved past, what it started out as, and that's fine, right? I mean, some punk music is really fucking good, like when we look at it from an artistic standpoint, but culturally speaking, it got stuck. It didn't move. It didn't grow past what it was, designed to do. And it's a commodity now. It's fashion. It's not, it's nothing more than fashion at this point. Right? There's nothing beyond that. Right? Like back in the 70s and 80s, yeah, I was like, oh my God, what is this? Right? I haven't effing point anymore. Really? Punk was political. Was it? Well, I mean, a lot of it was. Was all of it? Probably not. But, a lot of it was back in the day. I mean, it doesn't, does anything have a fucking point? I mean, I think a lot of things do have, I think a lot of things still do have points, but I think that it feels like, maybe this is just because I'm old, but it feels like, serious question, defiant, I think, political statements in the music. Yeah, I guess modern music is pointless. I can agree with that. Modern music is just kind of like, it lost its it doesn't have balls anymore. Like, I mean, and again, maybe this is because I'm old. Maybe this is because I'm older, right? Because like when I look at stuff from like the 90s, right? When I look at the grunge movement, when I look at like Nirvana, when I look at like, fucking Alice in Chains, fucking, oh God, Corrosion of Conformity, all of these bands from like the early and mid 90s, and then like the subsequent like kind of like new metal and stuff like that kind of developed like off of the back of that shit, right? Which is all connected to punk from the 70s and 80s, right? Like that's just unfucking deniable. Or like modern industrial, which came from the European industrial, musical movement, which was literally just making fucking noise with weird shit on stage. That had like completely broke against, like, I mean, original industrial music was so fucking punk because it was completely against, like, it didn't incorporate any of like music theory. It was literally just like noise and banging on stage, right? And Patton makes noise and makes it music. Love that guy. And so like modern industrial, like when we think about like Marilyn Manson, 9 Inch Nails, which I guess is more industrial than Manson. Manson at this point, just call him like rock, I suppose. Like there's a guy that came out recently, not recently, a few years ago, Author and Punisher, that does like really cool shit. But all that shit, like modern industrial music, was just born off of the back of European industrial. Point is, with music and its growth and stuff like that, like in the 90s, like it was, I don't know, it felt visceral. It felt like there was a point to it, a reason behind it. It wasn't it wasn't inherently just to make money, right? Yeah, I mean, obviously, like once it turned into a job, these guys, they ate it up, and anyone would, and I don't, hate them for it, but you could tell that it started because they wanted to make noise that they could put their emotions into, they could put their soul into it. And now it's just about the money. Now it's just about how many people are listening to it, how many clicks you get, how many Spotify plays you have. It's not about, like, I don't see the same amount or same level of emotion in music today that I did back in, like, the mid to late 90s, early 2000s. It's just, lost itself, I feel, like the music industry. Like there's a few that crop up and, kind of surprised me. A band I found recently, maybe like last year, Cane Hill, at least the album that they recently came out with, right? I think has a lot of emotion behind it. Wasn't made just for, it wasn't like a cash grab, so yeah. Anyway, moving forward. So what's the lesson using the whole punk culture thing and stuff like that? Like, what's the lesson? What's the idea that I'm trying to lay down with the agency versus reaction? If your only fuel is opposition, you'll either burn out or be consumed. Agency means acting from sovereignty, not retaliation. Right? So the point of what we try to go for here is we don't want to be just reactionary. We don't want to live in opposition all the time just to be oppositional, just to be adversarial. Because you are either going to completely burn out or get consumed by it. And usually, when you get to the point of being consumed by this shit, is when you become the thing you hate. Right? Most people will burn out and just kind of fall off. But if you get consumed by it, as we see a lot in like YouTube culture and stuff like that, if you look at like a lot of like political people that do political commentary and shit, they get so engulfed in their shit that when you look at the things that they stood against at the beginning of their career, and then you look at them today, they are essentially the very thing that they stood against when they started. They did a full circle into being the very thing that they stood against when they started out. They became completely engulfed. They were consumed by this oppositional mindset. It's horrible, right? So, creating new values, right? How does this work? Well, if we look at Nietzsche's Übermensch, right? Mensch, sorry, not man, men, right? Übermensch, one who creates values instead of inheriting or reacting to them, right? So you reject family values as forced morality. Then what values do you build in its place? Family on your own terms, not in their terms, right? So to oppose something is fine, but there comes a point of creation inside of this, right? We create kind of like our own ideal of what something should be, right? So move on from the I reject whatever they tell me to I build what I choose. And I think that is kind of like the main point, moral kind of capitalization that, this episode is coming to is it's fine to reject. It's fine to stand against. But what are you creating? when you stop trying to destroy, because I think what happens is so many people get engulfed and consumed by this whole I reject, I stand against, is that it's in constant perpetual mode of wanting to destroy what the other group or other person holds in value, instead of building your own. And then having something to stand for instead of something to stand against. And I think that is the biggest lesson to be learned here when it comes to the path of the adversary, or moving beyond opposition, is the creation of something to stand for instead of constantly trying to look at what you stand against. So, with that being said, that is going to be it for this morning, everyone. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Thank you all for coming out. You guys are fucking amazing. Curtis, it's good to see you again. We need to touch base for Saturday, I think it is. Saturday evening. We're going to have you on Apocrypha this Saturday. So Curtis is going to be joining us, and we might even dive into this a little bit more, because I think it'd be great to kind of have, like, you know, Curtis on, kind of go through all this stuff a little bit more and get his perspective on things. And so, perceived notions are the source of all internal strife. Exactly. So, that being said, as always, thank you, and hail thy fucking self. We'll see you in the next one. Peace the fuck out.